Legacy Precious Metals is the company that I trust to give you good and patient counsel for investing in your retirement. The Biden administration has caused a financial crisis, and they have no clue how to fix it. Oil prices have skyrocketed, and when oil prices go up, not only do your expenses go up, but the cost of transportation and shipping spikes, leading the prices of goods to rise. And we are already seeing record inflation. That's the last thing that we need. Our economy is in trouble, and you need to take steps to protect yourself. If all your money is tied up in stocks, bonds, and traditional markets, you may be vulnerable. So gold is one of the very best ways to protect your retirement. No matter what happens, you own your own gold. It's real, it's physical, and it's always been valuable since the dawn of time. Call Legacy Precious Metals today at 866-528-1903 or visit them online at legacypminvestments.com. That's legacypminvestments.com, where you can download the free investor's guide. You can also go to my Facebook page, Jenna Ellis. I am a public figure on Facebook, and I just posted yesterday a really great interview with the president of Legacy Precious Metals, who is discussing why you need to start your retirement account even if you're in your 20s or 30s. There is always a great time to protect your retirement and invest, just like you want to protect your health over the long term. So go to Legacy Precious Metals at legacypminvestments.com or call 866-528-1903.
As a constitutional law attorney, former senior legal advisor, and personal counsel to President Donald J. Trump, Jenna Ellis believes in the rule of law and the importance of integrity in our elections. And she's ready to tackle the big cultural and legal issues facing America. This is the Jenna Ellis Show. Here is your host, Jenna Ellis.
Happy Election Day, friends, and welcome to the Jenna Ellis Show, where I promised you would be breaking down all of the analysis, the predictions for tonight, and will we even know some of the swing races? While Democrats and Joe Biden's press secretary is saying don't count on it. Why is that? So joining me now for the next about 45 minutes as we look at all of the predictions and everything going on for Election Day is my very good friend, Grant Stinchfield, who has joined the Salem Podcast Network with his show, Stinchfield. Everyone needs to listen, subscribe. He is one of the greatest political commentators in America today. So Grant, thanks so much for joining me today.
Well, that's a hell of a compliment, Jenna. I appreciate it. It's always good to see you and everybody else out there. So thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. And, I love the shirt, Legalize Freedom. And hopefully free speech will now, and comedy apparently is now legal on Twitter. So that'll be interesting in the forthcoming days. But let's get right to it. I want to start first with all of these reports that we're already hearing from Georgia, Texas, Arizona, Pennsylvania, where voting machines are having issues, where printing ballots, apparently the ink cartridges haven't been changed out in what seems like maybe 2 years since the 2020 election. And, all of these different reports. What's going on, and why have we not done what seems like anything over the last 2 years to cure situations like this in the swing states?
It's amazing to me, Jenna, that we live in the greatest nation in the world, the most powerful nation in the world, the strongest nation in the world, the smartest, most advanced nation in the world, and we can't seem to get our elections in order. It's really an embarrassment. We run elections like a third world country. And so another one of our fellow Salem podcast members, Charlie Kirk, I believe he might have been the first to tweet out one of the big videos from Arizona. And I saw that, and then instantly, as I saw that going out, I got another video, which I believe was from the same place, about these tabulators that were down, and that, you could give them their ballot and we'll take it back to the headquarters. And you know what? In this day and age, I'm not doing that, right? Like, I want my ballot counted, and I want it counted now. So I pushed out that video along with Charlie Kirk's video, and I said, hey, anybody that's got problems, I want you to call me. I want you to reach out to me on Instagram, on Twitter, Stinchfield1776. Do you know, Jenna, my little Instagram DMs, I only have about 80,000 followers. It's overloaded with people taking videos from election polling places, from Arkansas to Texas to, as you said, Arizona to Georgia, with problems all over the place. And, someone sent me a picture. You mentioned these ink cartridges. This could explain the ballot that she texted me. they were having a 90%, is what she said, a 90% rejection rate in Maricopa County in Arizona. Go figure, that's the county where Phoenix is. That it was not solid black, the top little corner of this ballot. It was faded out, so the machines weren't reading the ballots. Like, do we not prepare for this? Someone asked me today on a radio show this morning, are you excited on election day? I said, election day for a political commentator, for someone who's ingrained in conservative politics, this is the Super Bowl for us, Jenna. And so we're not ready for this as a nation. It's so disappointing.
It really is. And speaking of Arizona, so here's just one thing that's going on with the ballots. So our good friend Tyler Boyer, you would know him from Turning Point USA. He works there, but he's also really involved in local Arizona politics. He tweeted this earlier. I just voted in person in Mesa County, and this is how it printed. And he attached a screenshot with this picture that, if you're watching on Rumble, we'll put up a photo of this. But it basically looks like how jaggedy the ballot printing would look if you haven't changed your ink cartridge in a while. Like, it skips over and it's kind of fuzzy. And so he said the reader rejected it, and had we not inspected the ballot before voting, we likely would have been told to just leave the ballot behind. The poll chief reprinted a new ballot. She said this is an ongoing issue with printers. So, this to me, Grant, you and I have been following all of these election integrity issues faithfully, in spite of all of the intimidation tactics from the Democratic left and, all of the major news networks that want to silence this issue. Thankfully, here on Salem, we are free to say what we want and talk about the truth and talk about these issues. And we have been following this since the 2020 election, and it's been 2 years. And so for me, it's like, we've made a lot of headway. I think there's a lot of hope in terms of states that are actually being forced by the court system now to follow state law. We've seen historic wins in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, other states. We've seen some legislation that has gone through. But in my opinion, stuff like this today just shows we're not doing enough. And yet the Republican and conservative, but it's really Republican coalition in DC, is patting themselves on the back by saying, oh, look at how many op-eds we printed this, over the last 2 years. And look at this little, cutesy election integrity scorecard that doesn't even list enforcement mechanisms in its metric for evaluating states. So why does it seem like the Republican Party just does not care about election integrity? If Ronna McDaniel, as the chairwoman of the RNC, was actually serious about this issue, our good friend John Cardillo tweeted this today. She would have had a plane full of lawyers on the ground in Arizona and in every swing state today before it even started happening.
Yeah. Well, I don't understand why this is not happening and having that army of lawyers on the ground. Jenna, you and I have been talking about this, as you mentioned, since 2020. You were on the legitimate front lines of this battle with President Trump from the moment we saw all the shenanigans after the presidential election in 2020. We've been talking about having Republican lawyers in the very places where these things happen. Why wouldn't we be prepared? It's not a secret that Maricopa County is going to be an issue. It's not a secret that Fulton County, where Atlanta is going to be an issue. It's not a secret that in Detroit, in Michigan, that it's going to be an issue, because there are no such thing as coincidences. Now, my question, and maybe to turn the roles on you, Jenna, I'm curious from your perspective, what would be the motivation to have all the misprints of ballots in Maricopa County? You think they would have enough Democrats, they'd want these ballots going through. So if you go under the assumption that maybe there's something nefarious going on, and I don't know, maybe it's just flat out negligence, I don't know, what would be the motivation there?
Right. And these are all great questions. And this is exactly why we need to be able to ask these kinds of questions and ask these election officials, was this just negligence? Why weren't you prepared? And not be called election deniers for it. Because no matter what side of the fence you're on, no matter what letter is after your voter registration, I'm unaffiliated now, by the way, this should be questions that concern every voter in every state in the entire country. But looking just at Maricopa County and some of these, Arizona is a really interesting state. a lot of people, just because of their population, they tend to do a lot of vote-in ballots and mail-in ballots. So even during the 2020 election, when there was this whole push to say, same-day voting and mail-in ballots there can be some issues with counting, with making sure they get there, all of this. A lot of the Republican members of Congress and some of the local state legislators were very concerned with that push because they said we have a lot of people that just expect to be able to vote by mail. So when you're looking at this type of printing error that only shows up on election day, so far we haven't heard about any of the mail-in ballots with this kind of printer issue. It makes it to me kind of suspect to say, okay, well, what party affiliation tends to turn out most on election day? Well, that's probably going to be the Republicans. So when you have all of these issues, and we're seeing in several states, including Texas and others, that there are reports of voting machine malfunctions and some of these things. Well, early voting has been going on in these states for the last couple of weeks, including up in Pennsylvania. And yet you don't hear about any of these types of printing issues, machine malfunction, or any issues with any ballots until today. Why is that? Well, I think there is a likely possibility, and in fact, even a probability, that it's because of the party that tends to turn out their voters most on election day, because we as Republicans like to go out and actually cast our vote and make sure that we show up on the polls on election day. So, that's my thought with it. But the whole point of, wherever the actual truth lies, whether it's just absolute gross negligence or it's something more nefarious going on, stuff like this shouldn't happen, because how hard is it really when your one job as a Secretary of State or as an election official is to make sure on the Super Bowl day everything runs according to plan and according to state law? So why is it so hard, Grant?
Well, Jenna, look, this is why, legitimately, I know you and I are friends, and I love you. This is why you're amazing, because that's why it all makes sense now. As you're spelling it out to me, I'm like, well, of course. Because Republicans, and much to the dismay of me in many cases, I tell people, go vote early, vote in person, but vote early. I don't want a storm to affect it. I don't want you to get sick. I just want to get your vote counted. But still, so many Republicans love to vote on election day. I love the passion and the patriotism behind it. But what better way to subvert the Republican vote and have all kinds of problems on election day when it's mostly Republicans voting and not Democrats? When they basically make up the difference between the early voting ballots and mail-in ballots on election day, what better way to subvert it? So again, is it really a coincidence that we're seeing this in the counties that have the most problems always? I doubt it. Sad part is we're seeing it in a lot of counties as well that I hadn't seen it before, and including my county. I'm in Dallas County. I was out at the polls today right before I came and talked to you, and there are some issues with voting machines throughout Dallas County as well. So, and what most of our national viewers don't know, Jenna, is that the city of Dallas County, is not a red Texas county or city. It is a very blue city and county. And so, but we've got some congressional seats that run over in there, and you know what? They need to play shenanigans, I guess, to make sure they can try to take back some of those seats.
Well, and that exactly, Grant, evidences why this shouldn't be a partisan issue. Because if, for example, in those mostly blue districts, then there are problems with whether it's machines or ballots or long lines or whatever. I want Democrats to be able to vote just as much as Republicans. I mean, this is the whole point of having free and fair elections, is that, of course, I'm going to, throughout the campaign and throughout the election cycle, champion the candidates that I think are the best fit to lead America and lead their state and local elections. But when it actually comes to game day, then everyone has the opportunity to participate in the franchise as long as they themselves are qualified and they register all of those things, and then they cast their ballot according to state law. Everyone should have the equal opportunity, and it's not about your race, your gender, whatever. We've actually cured those types of disenfranchisements and discrimination through the Reconstruction Amendments. And then my favorite, the 19th Amendment. Yay, I can vote and not be discriminated on the basis of sex. So all of these people claiming that it's somehow disenfranchisement, they're not looking at the scope of American history and what we've actually done to preserve the franchise and the access to the ballot for everyone. And so if a Democrat is unfairly or illegally suppressed from casting a ballot, that bothers me as an American and as a conservative constitutionalist just as much as if it's a Republican. Now, it seems to be, Grant, that Republicans are more often going through all of these sorts of shenanigans, and our poll watchers can't have access, and all of those kinds of things. But for the purposes of the lawsuits and for the purposes of election integrity as a bigger issue, I don't want to unfairly suppress the Democrat vote any more than I want to unfairly suppress the Republican vote. Why does it seem like the Democrats don't get that when they're calling us election deniers and they're saying, oh, look at these challenges? Like, for example, the lawsuit that John Fetterman out of Pennsylvania. Now, I knew it had Mark Elias's fingerprints all over it. Of course, that's the DNC operative, the former Clinton lawyer. He has been going around since before the 2020 election and pushing a lot of lawsuits that will favor the Democrats in terms of the outcome. And now he's trying to challenge undated or wrongly dated ballots in Pennsylvania. They're not cast according to state law, so they can't be counted. And the Supreme Court said no, but now they're challenging that in federal court when state law here is supreme. The Pennsylvania state legislature has said no. So why are Democrats getting away with it, and why can't we speak up on these issues? And but frankly, I'm really happy that courts are finally starting to get involved and push back.
Yeah. First off, let me make a couple points here. One, Democrats typically as a group, you have a few smart Democrats, not very many, but Democrats as a group are dopey, and I believe they're actually stupid. You can't support the policies that Democrats do and call yourself an intellectual. You just can't. So, of course, Fetterman has to sue because the Democrats apparently can't even date their ballots. Like, they can't figure out how. We're not talking about rocket science. We're not testing you on the Constitution in order to register a vote. We're saying you have to date your ballot. But apparently Democrats can't do that. So he's got to sue for that. They need mail-in ballots, Jenna, because Democrats are lazy. As a whole, of course, there are some Democrats that work hard, but others, mostly, as a whole, they are very lazy. And so they want to stay home. They want to be in their mom's basement playing video games, and they want someone to come pick up the ballot for them, probably fill it out for them as well, and then bring that to the polling place, which is why I call it the mail-in ballot scheme. We have traditions in America. The traditions in America are that you vote on election day. I'm not against early voting. In fact, I actually like the idea of early voting, but in-person early voting. The only time you have an absentee ballot is when you are absent from the state for a legitimate reason. That's it. Other than that, you vote in person. But see, the Democrats don't even want that, Jenna, because they can't get their lazy asses up off the couch to even go for 2 weeks of early voting. So they need to have a mail-in ballot, and God forbid they mail the ballot and they don't vote it. Well, they need coverage there too, because so let's see, they're stupid, they're dopey, and they're lazy. So that's the bottom line.
Yeah, and that absolutely makes so much sense, Grant, when you frame it that way, because really, when Mark Elias was doing his leftist suppression crazy news network tour last week, talking about why does a date on a ballot matter? Well, it absolutely matters, because then we know when it was filled out. I mean, it's just like the date on a check. When you say that you can't cash a check 90 days after the date on the check, right? It matters for purposes of memorializing that this is when this person actually issued this check, issued this ballot, filled out the ballot. All of those things, of course, dates matter. Dates matter to contracts all the time. And
see, there's no accountability to them, Jenna. It's just no accountability. They want to throw it out the window.
Exactly. And, why is it that we have billions of dollars every day that go through all of these different online transaction systems, and we can, down to the penny, track these transactions with an audit trail, with paperwork, with physical checks, with pictures of checks? We can go back and make sure that all of these different financial transactions, even if it's sending $1 through Venmo that, nobody has anymore because of PayPal and they're crazy, but all of those things have an audit trail. And yet when it comes to ballots, somehow, oh no, that's disenfranchising people, and that's being election deniers, and that's questioning the outcome if we actually want to have an audit. It doesn't make any sense at all, except what you said about accountability.
Yeah, there's no accountability from the left whatsoever. They can't handle their own business. They rely on government to pick up the slack for them. If I forgot to date the mail, well, I'll rely on the Democrat Party to sue in court so the date on my ballot doesn't matter. Look, Restaurants open and close. They have a closing date. The kitchen closes at a certain time. That's it. You're out of luck. Today, we've got problems in Arizona. The polls close at a certain time. So they want to extend now. There's talk about extending the hours of the polling places. Now, if you're online or in line, as many people say, I don't know why from New York I always say online, but in line, at the time of closing, you're allowed to vote everywhere I've seen. So why do they need to extend the hours now of voting? If you're in line, you should still be allowed to vote at the time the polls close, Jenna.
Yeah, none of this makes sense. And the only thing that is consistent about the Democrats is that they want to completely ignore state law in the administration of their elections. And this is why all of the election officials that are on the ballots right now, like the secretaries of state in each of these states, as well as in Pennsylvania, the governor of Pennsylvania, whoever that is, whether it's Doug Mastriano or Josh Shapiro, they will then appoint the next Secretary of State who will administer next year's election and the 2024 election. So these types of elections absolutely matter. And the only thing that Democrats are consistent about is wanting to completely ignore state law. It's like the Biden DOJ now under Merrick Garland. This was something else that came out today. Super proud of Governor Ron DeSantis and his Florida Department of State, because the DOJ has now gone to several states, I think it's something like 6, and saying, these are, of course, swing states in very specific counties with no allegation yet of anything that's wrong. They said several days ago, we are sending our federal officers to quote unquote monitor the elections for civil rights compliance. And the Civil Rights Act, of course, gave the federal government the opportunity to at least monitor from outside. But this is the first time that the DOJ is wanting to send monitors actually inside the polling places. And Florida is now pushing back and saying, no, there's been no allegation in these 3 specific counties that anything is wrong according to federal law, and Florida state law here is supreme. And they wrote this amazing letter. I put it out on my Twitter for anyone who wants to see the actual full text of this letter. I think it's great, Grant, that finally Governor DeSantis is showing what it looks like to reassert state sovereignty when it comes to election administration and say, sorry, Fed monitors, you have no business here.
Yeah. Governor DeSantis is great. I'm a huge fan of his. This idea that the state, the federal government is going to go into the states and start monitoring elections. First off, constitutional is that the states are supposed to oversee their own elections. So then you're going to have the feds come in, and I actually think it's to suppress our vote. It's to intimidate people that are not asking any questions whatsoever, because the feds are there. You don't want to get in trouble. And look at what the feds have done to every conservative that ever asked questions. They haul them into hearings. They subpoena them. Some of them they even throw in jail. And so, look, this is all about intimidation, I believe, on the federal government's part towards conservatives. But thank God for guys like Ron DeSantis who push back. You know, we always look at Florida now, and I think it's almost a mistake to look at Florida as this bright red state. Everyone's like, oh, Texas and Florida, the red states, it's so great. You know, Florida is like the hair on a frog's behind from going back blue. Charlie Crist were to win, Florida just falls apart. And it's not like the governor races, they win by these huge, large margins. Florida is still a swing state. And so, you know, we haven't really talked in the media about Governor DeSantis versus Crist. He's not really getting a lot of attention. But, you know, I don't think it's a shoe-in as much as everybody thinks it is.
Yeah, that's a really important point. And everyone really forgets that in 2018, by a very razor-thin margin, which I attribute to Donald Trump and going out and endorsing Ron DeSantis, who at that point was not well-known and certainly not a national figure, by a razor-thin margin, won the governorship instead of Andrew Gillum, and we have had over the last 4 years the free state of Florida. But in the last few weeks, even polling, Ron DeSantis has only been 4 points up. Now, it's not because he's some kind of rhino or he's somebody that is not going to be a great governor for his next term. It is because there is still such a huge population of Democrats in Florida, and we have to make sure
Yeah.
that these races are talked about and that ultimately they're won. I do think Ron DeSantis is going to win because of how many Republicans have moved to Florida from California, from Texas, to make sure that it stays the free state of Florida. But I don't think, like you said, that we can take it for granted and we can just assume that he's going to win by this historic landslide, like some of these people who are, really well-meaning, but they're very optimistic in terms of the political landscape when you actually look at the breakdowns of the districts. So let's talk about that.
This will be interesting, this election in Florida.
Yes. So
Yeah,
go ahead.
it'll
Let's
be
talk
interesting
about
in Florida
and then
because
some of these swing states.
you've got the same dynamic in Florida that we have in Texas. So Texas had a big draw from California, people looking to escape California. The only problem is the original people that were coming for a long time were the California liberals who I guess didn't understand why they were escaping. And then they'd come here and they'd vote Democrat. And slowly Texas started to move. We are still a bright red state, but moving closer to the center. Florida, the same thing. You've got a lot of people, especially from New York and New Jersey during the pandemic, that were like, heck, I don't want to do this. I'm not being locked down. I'm moving to Florida. My fear is, though, how many of them are Democrats that were moving down there and still don't comprehend the oppression of the Democrat Party during the pandemic and just chalking it up to, all the politicians were following the science, which was totally bogus, and are going to vote Democrat when they get to Florida. This is the first real time we get a test of that.
Yeah. So your prediction on Ron DeSantis winning, and by how many points?
Well, I think he wins. And if everything was a normal world that we live in where common sense held true, I would think that Ron DeSantis would win by a lot. But I'm not at that point. Nothing is easy anymore. So I don't know. I think maybe he wins by 5 points.
Wow. And I think that will be a wake-up call for people. And of course, the left is going to try to manipulate that if it happens. Instead of looking at the truth about Florida being a swing state, they're going to say, oh, look, Ron DeSantis isn't nearly as popular as he says that he is. And so, they're going to try to then dissuade the narrative of him jumping into the presidential race. And of course, the mainstream media always manipulates any outcome for their own political purposes instead of just talking about the truth. And so when we look at some other states, like, for example, up in New York, when we have Lee Zeldin versus Kathy Hochul, and it's amazing that there is actually a possibility for a Republican governor in the state of New York, only because of how much of a disaster throughout the pandemic Andrew Cuomo was, and now Kathy Hochul, who was his lieutenant governor over the last year and a half since Andrew Cuomo resigned, which of course you and I talked about on air. And I think that was only because they Me Too'd him so that there wouldn't be investigations on what he did in those nursing homes. But now Kathy Hochul has been a worse Democrat. So what's going on in New York? What's your prediction there?
I would offer this up. I'm not even sure it's the Cuomo factor, because Cuomo was actually very, very popular. I think if he would have run again for governor, there's a chance he probably would have won. I think it's the New York City factor. Bill de Blasio. See, New York City decides everything for New York. I'm a former New Yorker. I don't like to tell anybody that I grew up there, but I did. I grew up right outside of New York City in Westchester County. Yeah, please don't. I love my Texas. I'm a Texas Tiger now for sure. But look, de Blasio was a disaster. This new guy is a disaster. They've got the same district attorney type nonsense in New York City, and the crime is out of control. New York City is going to be the key here. And I'll tell you what I think the other key is why Lee Zeldin can win, and win by a very small margin. New York Democrats had never had to rig the system because it's been blue for so long. They've never really been in any chance. We got to make sure it works out this way. They never had to worry about that. I think this came out of the blue. I don't think they've had enough time. If they were going to try to rig the system, they haven't had enough time to rig it. So I think Lee Zeldin, I think he pulls it out. I really do. By the skin of his teeth, but I think he does it.
Wow, that would be an amazing upset, regardless of any of the other races. And, of course, the battle then in Georgia between Brian Kemp and Stacey Abrams, who I think still hasn't conceded the last time. And, I was reading an article today from MSNBC, and the framing of it was so ridiculous because, of course, after every single Republican It was who denies the election results, falsely denies. Of course, it's falsely denies the election results of 2020. Then you get down to Stacey Abrams, and they're like, and Stacey Abrams, who didn't immediately concede the election. Like, that's how they frame it. They're so pathetic in their narratives. But I think, if New York actually goes Republican, that's amazing. What's your prediction in Georgia on the rematch between Brian Kemp? And were you surprised to hear President Trump last night actually including Brian Kemp on his list of Republicans to go out and vote for? I kind of was, honestly.
Yes and no. I think President Trump knows that Stacey Abrams would be a disaster, much more of a disaster than Brian Kemp is. But this gets me back to where I am as a conservative, as a Republican, as a patriot in America. I'm voting for any Republican over any Democrat. There's not one time I'm ever going to say this term people over party. It's not happening, not in today's world anymore. So I'm voting for every Republican. I, like President Trump, was not happy with Governor Kemp. I was not happy with Brad Raffensperger. I was not happy with the people in charge of Georgia when the 2020 debacle unfolded. But look, he's the guy we got now. So we have to support him. And so I would support Governor Kemp as well. Look, you don't want Stacey Abrams as the governor of Georgia. That would be, talk about a radical, talk about fundamentally changing what is really a great state with great conservative roots, whether or not they elected Raphael Warnock or not. But it really is. It has great conservative roots, Georgia. And I think Warnock's going to be sent packing along with Stacey Abrams.
Yeah, that Senate race is one to watch. And I don't know that we're going to know the results of that particular race. I think we will. And I think Brian Kemp will win by at least a couple of points and outside the margin of a Georgia recount, which of course isn't automatic. You have to request that. But in terms of the Herschel Walker and Raphael Warnock Senate race, I think that one is going to be super, super, super tight. And probably we won't know the outcome tonight. What do you think?
Let me say this about Herschel Walker. I did not think that he was the greatest candidate in the world to offer up. I'm a huge fan of Herschel Walker. I think he's a nice guy in many respects. My compliment of him of being a nice guy is one of the reasons why I didn't want him to become a United States Senator, because I think he's too nice. I don't think he's got it in him. I wish he would take some of the gridiron snarl from the football field and put it into politics. But with that said, he's come a long way since the beginning of his campaign. The last debate, he did a very good job. He's pleasantly surprised me as he's come forward. But, this is a guy who wants to represent the people, but I don't think he was ingrained in the policies of conservatism. I don't think he's a constitutional conservative that just lives and breathes it. I think he's still got a learning process to go through there. But again, better than Raphael Warnock, and I believe pleasantly surprising. So, in the end, people of Georgia are seeing the same thing that everybody around the country is seeing, the same thing that we talk about all the time with inflation and crime and gas prices and energy independence and our enemies on the move. They see all that and they say, you know what? The Joe Biden agenda, the radical leftist agenda isn't working. So let's try something else. And I think that'll work for Herschel Walker as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's mind-boggling to me how anyone could actually vote Democrat on the merits and think that somehow, their policies actually work. And we know that the Democrats can't defend any of their policy positions on the merits. And that's why they don't want to have a debate about abortion in the states, because for too long, we have just been told it's super precedent by these idiots like Dianne Feinstein that, that's never going to change. And so they've just shut down the arguments on any of these really important policy issues. And now in the wake of the Dobbs case, they're just saying, oh, Rovember, that's kind of their big hashtag, because they don't want to have these debates and they don't want to have to defend their position on the merits because they can't. So let's move up to Pennsylvania. Because speaking about another kind of really nice guy who actually, was really liked by Oprah until he ran on the Republican ticket, of course, is Dr. Oz. And that whole Oz versus Fetterman has been a really interesting race to watch, because I think people forget that Fetterman is actually really liked in Pennsylvania because he seems like he's just a man of the people, and they like the fact that he's walking around in this like oversized hoodie and looks like, kind of the guy who's not the politician. And there's this perception that Oz is the outsider, even though, the Democrats love to watch him on TV, again, before he became a Republican. So that's another race, Grant. I don't think we're going to know the outcome tonight. I think it's too razor thin of a margin. What's your prediction?
I've got harsh thoughts towards the people of Pennsylvania because when Mitt Romney ran for president, I actually went up there and I started walking neighborhoods in Western Pennsylvania telling coal miners, do not vote for Barack Obama. You vote for this guy, they're going to put you out of business. And though Mitt Romney has completely failed me, I mean, like, what was I doing? But look, again, that's an example of a Republican that was going to be better than a Democrat, right? So, and I didn't know what Mitt Romney would ultimately become, just a jealous, whiny jerk. I didn't know that at the time. But anyway, what I learned from Western Pennsylvania is people looked at me like I had two heads, but they're Democrats. Well, we vote Democrat. Well, we like Democrats. And my neighbors are Democrats. So you got to wake up. Like at some point, politics become personal. They're going to put you out of business, but you're saying your neighbors are Democrats because he's a guy that wears a dirty sweatsuit, as President Trump says, and he's got a hoodie. That's why you vote for him. He cannot formulate a sentence. I feel bad for the guy that he had a stroke. And I do believe that plays a role in why he can't formulate a sentence. This man's a national security risk. So if you're Dr. Oz, you've got to be saying to yourself, I'm down to this guy or neck and neck with this guy. He can't even formulate a sentence, much less a speech. And there's a chance the people of Pennsylvania are going to put him into the United States Senate when Joe Biden actively says and talks about shutting down coal plants. Fetterman will be right there with them. And yet I do not know what is wrong with Pennsylvania. They have let me down now for, what is it, a decade. Pennsylvania has let me down. So maybe they turn it around this time. I hope and pray.
Well, I mean, I hope so. And I think ultimately, and I hope that Oz will just barely squeak it out. And like our friends at the Babylon Bee have said, it's not just neck and neck against Fetterman, it's neck and neck and neck with Fetterman, which I think is hilarious. But
Yeah.
also on
Can I make this one point, Jenna?
Yeah.
So on the Democrats, right? You mentioned Oprah Winfrey. She gave Dr. Oz a show. She loved Dr. Oz, right? You had Barack Obama. You know he was palling around with Dr. Oz. They're all buddy, chumly. Oprah Winfrey comes out and publicly endorses Fetterman. First off, what does that say about your loyalty to your friends? And Oprah really thinks that Fetterman is going to be a better senator. Now, she may agree with the Democrat policies, and she may be going with my philosophy. Any Democrat over any Republican is better, where I say any Republican over any Democrat is better. She may be going with that. But if that's your best friend, it's one of your good friends, do you not just stay out of it? Is that just not like the loyal thing to do, is just kind of stay out of this one and let it play out?
Well, this is where I truly believe that people like Oprah Winfrey and like these radical, rabid feminists, they care more about the choice to abort a human child than they do about their friends. They have those, that's where their values are more than anything else. And that is showing in the Democrats' treatment of Donald Trump. It's showing in their treatment of Dr. Oz. It's showing in their treatment of election integrity issues and in everything else that they say and that they lie about. And so when we look at the governor's race in Pennsylvania, because this is also incredibly important, it has frankly, and honestly, and everyone knows that I have been a senior advisor on the Mastriano campaign. And I can tell you this race is heartbreaking to me because my prediction is, frankly, that Shapiro is going to win based on the polls. Now, you know, God could have a miracle, and I hope that there is a miracle in Pennsylvania and Mastriano will pull this out. But the main culprit here is because the Republicans, the RNC, the establishment junkies like Karl Rove and others, and the Republican Governors Association refused to get behind Doug Mastriano. So he did not have enough funding and support to be able to push back in media with an ad campaign that Josh Shapiro just ran roughshod over all of these ads, and even Karl Rove putting in attack ads against Mastriano to paint him as this extremist that is so unfair. It's so ridiculous. I've even heard Trump loyalists in Pennsylvania are saying, you know, Shapiro kind of seems like a nice guy. I mean, that Mastriano, he's kind of extreme. And I know all they're paying attention to is the ads. It's not even on the forefront of their mind that that Mastriano is the America First Donald Trump endorsed candidate. And this is predictable, but absolutely tragic to me that the Republican Party, the national establishment, would rather see a radical leftist in office that they can fundraise off of than have a Republican governor in office that they can't control. Am I wrong?
No, you're not. And in fact, this is the perfect time for me to tease my podcast episode that drops tomorrow. I've got a great one about Kyrie Irving that's already out there now. Stinchfield is the name of the podcast. But tomorrow, you'll be interested in this, Jenna. So I interviewed Kathy Bennett, who ran against Dr. Oz in a primary. This is the black woman who was a byproduct of rape. Her mother had her when her mother was 11 years old, staunchly pro-life. She has really eye-opening, eye-popping things to say about the GOP establishment in Pennsylvania and how they actively work to sink her campaign. She calls out Sean Hannity on Fox News, my buddy Greg Kelly on Newsmax, that the GOP establishment had gotten to them. Now, I like both of those guys, so don't get me wrong. I like Hannity and I like Greg Kelly, but she was very outspoken about the power of the GOP establishment to sink candidates that they don't like, even at the detriment of the people. So this is why I think one of the biggest challenges as Republicans we have, it's not just battling back against the Biden administration, but it's battling back against an establishment GOP that seems like it's a uniparty with the Democrat establishment, where you talk about the Karl Roves, the Ronna McDaniels. And I think this is the reason, Jen, I'm not going to speak for you, Jenna, but I think it's the reason why you call yourself an independent. Because let's face it, Jenna,
Oh, it totally
you're
is.
not voting
We'll
for a
say it.
Democrat.
Absolutely.
Am I right? There's not one Democrat you're ever. Never. So you were so angry with the GOP establishment that you have to call yourself an independent now. They're chasing people away from our party, but it's not the good people. We still have the power. I still believe, Jenna, that Stinchfield's army, the people that listen to this program, my program, the people that rally around grassroots efforts, we still ultimately can wrestle back control of this party. And President Trump knows that too.
And we're the real Republicans. And this is why there is such a divide between the establishment and MAGA Inc. And this is where the establishment would love to dump Donald Trump as fast as they can. It's why they didn't actually support him in the aftermath of the 2020 election. And it's why they're not supporting the America First candidates like Doug Mastriano that they don't prefer. And they are trying on purpose. It's not even just that they're not putting money in. They're trying on purpose, and they're targeting him to tank his campaign, to say, see, this is where you have to bend the knee and bow the head to the Republican Party, and you have to go along with all of our crazy talking points, the fact that we're, so now pro-LGBT, we're pro-gay marriage, we're pro all of this other stuff that is not the conservative platform. It's not constitutionally correct to federalize any of that. All of these things that we could do a whole other show on all of the breakdown of the analysis, but they're basically saying like what they did to Robbie Starbuck in Tennessee 5, where they called him, you're not a real Republican. They manipulated the rules on the local level to say he can't run, he can't even be on the ballot. So you don't even have the option of choosing anyone except the establishment preferred candidate. I hate that. I don't want to be a part of it. And when people say stop infighting, this is necessary to preserve and protect the conservative platform in years to come and candidates that I want to vote for, because I don't want a national party telling me in my home state who I can and can't have the option to vote for. I want a wide primary and people to have the free and fair choice to say, do we want the establishment hack or do we want the America First candidate? I want that choice. The people of Pennsylvania, by a wide margin, Grant, by over double what the other candidates had in the primary, they chose Doug Mastriano, the Republican National Party, the local Pennsylvania local GOP. I give credit to them. They have been behind him. But the national RNC, the establishment hacks like Karl Rove and Ronna McDaniel and Kevin McCarthy and Mitch McConnell and everybody else, they have not been behind Doug Mastriano, and that is shameful.
I'll tell you what I do believe is behind that establishment failing to get behind strong MAGA-style conservatives, Trump supporters. There is a desperate need to be liked and loved by the mainstream media and the wealthy donor class in America. And so you see this among the establishment types. They so desperately want the Washington Post to like them. They want the New York Times to like them.
And that's why everyone should tune in to the Stinchfield podcast. So excited that you're with the Salem Media Network now, and I know you've had your radio show for the past several years, and that's awesome. I've been a frequent guest with you there, and so in just the last few minutes that I have with you, Grant, and we could do another hour on all of this, frankly, but in just the last few minutes we have, I want to cover Arizona and also Michigan. So Arizona first, you have Carrie Lake, who is running well ahead of Katie Hobbs, but we have some shenanigans, it looks like, going on in Arizona, and then of course the Blake Masters, Tim Ryan Senate race there. What's your prediction? Will we know tonight? And how soon is Fox going to call Arizona for the Democrats?
Oh, boy. So my prediction is that Carrie Lake and Blake Masters will win Arizona. I think the people of Arizona have said enough is enough. If, of course, these shenanigans don't take over and ruin everything. So that's the big monkey wrench in all of this, that you just don't know. But on a level playing field, there's no way Carrie Lake and Blake Masters shouldn't win this. And I was one of the first to ever interview Carrie Lake. She had just left her TV station. She had gotten kicked out for being a Trump supporter. And she came on and I asked her directly. I said, listen, you talk a good game, but how do I know you're a conservative? And, she smiled and she gave me her best pitch. And she still reminds me to this day when I see her at events. She says, remember that interview? She said, I proved it to you, didn't? And I said, yes, you did. You are an amazing woman, an amazing candidate. And I think Carrie Lake is going to amazing places and amazing heights. I love what this woman is doing, and I love her ability to think on her feet. She's sharp, and she's a fighter. So I think she's gonna do great.
Yeah, I really do too. And I cannot wait to see where she goes from the governor's office as well. I mean, I love that a few people are predicting she'll be the first elected female president. I think that's a great forecast beyond the people like the Nikki Haley's, who of course are the establishment hacks. I'd love to see a genuine America first. And people, then will pull out all this stuff from like years ago and say, well, look, Carrie Lake wasn't always this conservative. Well, yeah, a lot of people weren't. And then guess what? We woke up during the Trump administration to all of the establishment crazy. I mean, like you were talking earlier about not really knowing at the time how bad Mitt Romney was. I mean, I voted for John McCain, if you can believe that. I mean, because that was who the choice was in 2008. And so we've come a long way from leaving the establishment leftists, and even the Democrats that are leaving, they're choosing freedom over their former party. I mean, let's not forget, Donald Trump himself used to be a registered Democrat. People can change. Right. People can open their eyes. People can see this is the way forward, and they can leave their past behind. And we should never, ever, ever let media control today's narrative by anything that has happened in the past. Not that we don't learn from history, but in terms of where people's policy positions are and how they can change their mind and do better for constitutional conservatism and America first in the future. So then last state, though, Grant, is of course Michigan. Tudor Dixon up there, razor thin, which I think it's insane that anyone would believe that Gretchen Whitmer actually can handle being the governor after she's lying, saying that kids were only out of school for a couple of months. No, we were all there in the shutdowns when you actually quartered off sections of Walmarts and other stores, saying this isn't an essential product for you to decide to purchase during the pandemic. So again, Michigan is one of those states, very interesting demographic. What's your prediction on the Tudor Dixon Gretchen Whitmer race?
You know what's interesting? I just thought of this now as we're sitting here talking. You know who probably was the worst thing to happen to Tudor Dixon is Carrie Lake. Carrie Lake was probably the worst thing that happened to Tudor Dixon because she just totally took over the scene from the female governor, fiery, takes the fight to the media, and is so Trump-like. Tudor Dixon had those things. She's just not quite at the level of Carrie Lake. But if there was no Carrie Lake, Tudor Dixon is probably all we'd be talking about right now.
Great point.
I think she's an amazing woman. I don't have great faith in Michigan. Michigan's one I don't. If we pull it out, I think it's going to be a huge upset.
Yeah, I agree. And I really hope that we send Whitmer packing. And I hope that the people of Michigan, if you're a voter in Michigan and you haven't voted yet, get out and vote vote for Tudor Dixon. So just looking then, big picture, kind of some closing thoughts here, Grant Stinchfield. Thank you so much for joining me. And it'll be interesting to look over the next couple of days if we don't see all of the results come in tonight. But where do you think the country is headed after this election and all of these things tonight? And and announcement that Donald Trump is saying he's going to say on November 15th. What's the projection on the presidential race? Do you think Ron DeSantis is going to put his hat in the ring if and when Donald Trump announces?
I don't think after Ron DeSantis wins the election tonight in Florida, I do believe he'll win, even though he said maybe not as much as we want him to win by, but I do believe he'll win. I don't think he then has to turn around and say, hey, you know what, I'm running for president a week later. He'd have to announce fairly quickly after Donald Trump gets into this race, which he's going to do on November 15th. I'm almost 100% confident in that. So I don't think Ron DeSantis gets in. And, everyone's so angry with President Trump for saying, oh, Ron DeSanctimonious. President Trump much better than I do. But I've had the time to be around him a little bit, certainly study him a lot. And I believe all that was a shot across the bow saying, hey, Buster, I love you, but don't tussle with me because I'll destroy you. So here's a little example of what could come if you decide that you want to go toe-to-toe with me. I think that's all that was. I think it was a strategic move. The only message that was meant for was Ron DeSantis, not anybody else. And later in the speech, by the way, he went on to endorse Ron DeSantis. The media didn't cover any of that. So I don't think Ron DeSantis gets in the race against President Trump. If he does, it's a really bad move, and it's really bad for both of them. It doesn't help anybody having those two powerhouses in our party go head to head.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on the Ron DeSanctimonious comment. I thought it was funny. It was typical Trump. And it was also, it wasn't even really an open attack like what Trump actually does when he's trying to attack. I completely agree with you. It was just kind of this shot of saying, hey, I'm still the leader of the party. I'm running in 2024, and you better consider before you try to go toe to toe with me. And for the people of the great state of Florida, there's a lot of people that want another 4 years of Ron DeSantis as governor, but then there are a lot of people who want him to run. So I think it's going to be very interesting, and it's kind of sad that here on midterm day at like early evening we're actually talking about the 2024 race. But that's politics, and you and I love it in the sense of looking at the projections for our country, but overall, Grant, I think that we do have a lot of hope and reason to have hope that people are waking up in this country. They're seeing the issues with election integrity. I hope that we see some of those legal fights and those wins. I hope that we see a giant red wave in as many races as possible tonight. And I do think that we have hope that there are still enough people in this country that care about freedom, care about liberty, that we are going to say no to the petty tyrants and the Democrats, and we're going to move forward and genuinely save America. So closing thoughts, what say you?
Just God bless America. We're too good to let the Democrats take control, and I always have great faith in the American people that we're too smart for this, and we will turn it around. This country is not one that sinks ever. And so just remember that. But it takes all of us to gather together and fight like the Dickens and make sure we're loud and proud and be bold. Stop this nonsense about not talking about politics. You talk about it everywhere you possibly can. Be bold, and we take our country back. God bless America.
100%. God bless America. Well, Grant Stinchfield, thanks so much for joining me today. And I know we'll be in touch throughout the night, just looking at all of the results. And thank you so much for joining me. Everyone, follow Grant on all of the social media accounts, Stinchfield 1776, and also subscribe to his brand new podcast on the Salem Podcast Network, Stinchfield. And you always know that you need to subscribe to my podcast as well across all channels. If you're not a subscriber, go ahead and click that subscribe button wherever you stream. And I will see you tomorrow, and who knows what can happen tonight, but looking forward to breaking it all down even more tomorrow right here on the Jenna Ellis Show. Legacy Precious Metals is the company that I trust to give you good and patient counsel for investing in your retirement. The Biden administration has caused a financial crisis, and they have no clue how to fix it. Oil prices have skyrocketed, and when oil prices go up, not only do your expenses go up, but the cost of transportation and shipping spikes, leading the prices of goods to rise. And we are already seeing record inflation. That's the last thing that we need. Our economy is in trouble, and you need to take steps to protect yourself. If all your money is tied up in stocks, bonds, and traditional markets, you may be vulnerable. So gold is one of the very best ways to protect your retirement. No matter what happens, you own your own gold. It's real, it's physical, and it's always been valuable since the dawn of time. Call Legacy Precious Metals today at 866-528-1903 or visit them online at legacypminvestments.com. That's legacypminvestments.com, where you can download the free investor's guide. You can also go to my Facebook page, Jenna Ellis. I am a public figure on Facebook, and I just posted yesterday a really great interview with the president of Legacy Precious Metals, who is discussing why you need to start your retirement account even if you're in your 20s or 30s. There is always a great time to protect your retirement and invest, just like you want to protect your health over the long term. So go to Legacy Precious Metals at legacypminvestments.com or call 866-528-1903. MyPillow is having their biggest sheet sale of the year. You all have helped build MyPillow into the amazing company that it is today. Now, Mike Lindell, the inventor and CEO, wants to give back exclusively to you, his listeners. The Percale bed sheet set is available in a variety of colors and sizes, and they are all on sale. So, for example, the queen size is regularly priced at $89.98, but is now only $39.98 with our listener promo code Jenna, Jenna. So order now, because when they're gone, they're gone. The Percale bed sheets are breathable and have a cool and crisp feel. These come with a 10-year warranty and a 60-day money-back guarantee, so don't miss out on this incredible offer. There's a limited supply, so be sure to order now. You can call 1-800-564-8475 and use the promo code Jenna, or go to mypillow.com/Jenna. You can click on the radio listeners square and use the promo code Jenna. That's Jenna. Thank you so much to all of Mike Lindell's listeners and listeners of this podcast for making sure to support MyPillow and using our exclusive listener promo code Jenna. That's Jenna.